Well, thanks for the warm welcome that I've already received this morning. It's nice to make new acquaintances and friends and look forward to getting to know more of you and our time together. And again, thanks for the sacrifice of making this time to come out here and gather with other pastors and consider some things from Holy Scripture and how we might apply those in ministry or how they might be relevant. And I'm keeping with the theme that has been given to me for the main conference, Doctrine of God themes. A friend was driving me to the train yesterday. I live in Philadelphia, although I did grow up 50 minutes south of here, down in San Joaquin Valley, but most of my adult life now in Philly. Driving to the airport, he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, the only thing I know. Doctrine of God. It's my one-string banjo, but I'll play it till I die, and then for all of eternity. Like there are songs you can sing that you'll stop singing, but not this one. So I'm happy to again do Doctrine of God and talk about some of this with you. I want to spend our first session this morning talking about divine incomprehensibility. I'll read a text, pray, and we'll just enter into some consideration of this together. Romans 11, verse 33. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has become his counselor, or who has first given to him that it should be repaid to him? For of him and through him and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. Let's begin in prayer. God, we bless you and thank you that though your ways are not ours and your thoughts are not ours, indeed they are past tracing out, yet, Lord, you have condescended to reveal yourself to us in truth. We pray that you would give us both great desire and modesty at once as we seek to grow in the knowledge of you and help others to do the same. Bless us in our time of contemplation here this morning, even as we consider your incomprehensibility. We ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. I forgot to ask for a copy of the Second London Confession before I came up, and so I was told that this is slightly less formal than the conference session, so I'm just going to ask for it right now. And I see Steve's already en route. Oh, Steve, we got you beat. This is. I like a room where when you ask for the Second London Confession, there's not one more than 10 feet away from you. Thank you. Signs of good things. Confession chapter 2. This is I want to just frame this. I have a few different objectives here with regard to this doctrine. First, I think sometimes there's a misconception when people come to, let's just say, confessionals. And don't worry, this is not going to be an hour where I shill for the confession. I like the confession. I'm confessional. I commend it to you. That's all I'm going to say about it. Beside that, I just like it, and I'm going to refer to it. So that's my point here. But I think sometimes when people come to the confession and they read something like Confession chapter 2 of God and of the Holy Trinity, they have this impression that somehow confessional people think they have God all figured out. That this very precise, careful theology is maybe presuming to know too much about God. And I think that's actually a mistake. I think the confession, with all of its careful God talk, if I can put it that way, is also very emphatic that whatever is going on with careful theological God talk, it's not comprehension. And I want to, and this, it's interesting to me, the Presbyterians do a nice job with the Westminster Confession. I like the Second London. It actually triples down on divine incomprehensibility in paragraph 1. So just listen to this, and then we'll explore this a bit together. I'm just reading from paragraph 1. Actually, just the first half of paragraph 1, interestingly. The Lord our God is but one only living and true God, whose subsistence is in and of himself, infinite in being and perfection. And then here comes the first reference to incomprehensibility, whose essence cannot be comprehended by any but himself. So the first thing I want to say on divine incomprehensibility is, hear me carefully, that we're not saying that God is absolutely incomprehensible. God is comprehensible to someone. And the confession tells us who. So who is it? Himself. So God comprehends God. That is to say, God's knowledge is as deep as God's being. There's no sort of foggy, dark, God isn't in a process of self-discovery. God is not a stranger to God. God is not alienated from himself. God is light. In him is no darkness at all. God's knowledge is God's being. God's knowledge and God's being are coextensive, coterminous, yes, even identical, so that God perfectly knows God. In other words, there is a mind that comprehends the divine, and it's the divine mind itself. Okay? So the confession is not saying, when we talk about divine incomprehensibility, we're not saying that God is sort of like an unintelligible, nonsensical, enigmatic bundle. We're not suggesting that God's unintelligible, but there is an intelligibility that exceeds the capacity of the creature. So when it says that he's incomprehensible, the first thing we do is qualify that. We don't just say he's incomprehensible full stop. We say to any but himself. It's important that we say that. Otherwise it sounds like God's just a big bundle of nonsense, but isn't that the cost of faith? Faith's just believing nonsense and taking a big deep dive into it. Certainly not, but we go on. A most pure spirit, invisible, without body parts or passions, who only hath immortality. And then here comes the second reference, dwelling in the light which no man can approach unto. 1 Timothy 6. Dwelling in the light which no man can approach unto. That he dwells in unapproachable light, no man has seen him or can see him. Who is immutable, immense, eternal, and then it just says it, incomprehensible, almighty, every way, infinite, most wise, most holy, most free, most absolute, and then it goes on. Three different ways of addressing the question of incomprehensibility in the first half of the first paragraph. Uncomprehended by all but himself, dwells in unapproachable light and no man can see him, and then he's incomprehensible. Those are really the point. The confession, with all of its carefulness, is not pretending to have some sort of mastery or have figured out God. That's certainly, I think there's a superficial impression. If you're theologically untutored, and then suddenly you encounter some pretty muscular and articulate and sophisticated theology, which I think is what we find in confession too, you might form the opinion that whoever wrote this thinks they have God all figured out. And just so you don't form that opinion, the confession just sort of sprinkles in reminders that that's not what this is about. That's not what we're doing. We're not, as it were, mastering God with our thoughts. He masters us, but we don't master God. I think even we should get rid of this whole idea that there are people who know more about God than other people, and there are people who are more careful in articulating the knowledge of God. I don't think we should ever use the word expert. Like, he's an expert on God. That's not a thing, actually, for creatures. There is an expert on God. Yeah. Just not a created one. Not even Michael. Or Gabriel, or if Raphael is a real angel, he's in Tobit. But, I'm not even going to, maybe he's real. Tobit's not inspired, but maybe Raphael's real. I'm not even going to say Raphael, with all due respects to holy angels. All right, so what are we after with this doctrine? None of our thoughts about God is adequate to or equal to the majesty and the glory of his being. Put a little differently, God is greater than your greatest thought of God. This needs to be communicated. Not just the pastor needs to have this in him, but this also needs to regularly be communicated to the congregation, that whatever we're doing in the worship of God, even our telling of God's greatness, he's actually greater than our ability to tell his greatness. That doesn't make our telling of his greatness untrue or dishonoring. It just makes it creaturely. Listen to the words of, and it occurs to me, though this wasn't by design when I composed these notes, that there are two temple dedication prayers in the Old Testament. I'm going to start with the second one, the Levites dedicating the temple built under Ezra and Nehemiah after the exiles return, and this from Nehemiah 9:6. If you're looking for a text, this is where I'll be for just a moment. Nehemiah 9:6. The other one I'll return to or go to in just a little bit is 1 Kings chapter 8, when Solomon dedicates the first temple. And at both of these temple dedication prayers, there's an indication of God's beyondness, that he's not contained by the box on the hill. That's what I'm calling the temple for our purposes. Nehemiah 9:6. They begin the prayer of dedication this way. Blessed be your glorious name. Listen to this next line. And may it be exalted above all blessing and praise. First of all, I'm just going to put the question out. What does that even mean? Be exalted above all blessing and praise. In other words, what they're saying is, Lord, your worth is more than we're able to tell. Human words fail to adequately measure. They don't fail to truthfully refer, but they do fail to adequately measure his glory. Does that difference make sense? That the idea that our words do not, as it were, say it all, doesn't make our words worthless or untrue or unworthy. It just makes them not comprehensions. All right, we'll step toward this. Adoration of God's mysterious transcendence is a fundamental feature of all true religion and worship. If you think that you have, as it were, given God his due after an hour and a half in church on Sunday morning, you don't understand God. In other words, you've given him what you can give him, but you haven't given him his due in the sense of something equal to his worth. Something equal to his worth. All right, so let's begin by some foundations. First, the meaning of divine incomprehensibility. What are we talking about? To safeguard the important truth of his all-surpassing greatness, theologians ordinarily speak about God as incomprehensible to the creature. The doctrine simply means, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, that the knowledge of God cannot be contained by the mind of the creature. And the key word in that is containment. I'm not saying that creatures cannot have true knowledge of God. If they couldn't have true knowledge of God, let's just call it quits right now and head to the coffee and get into those Danishes back there. Not that that's bad, but why spend any time talking about God if we can't know him? I'm not suggesting we cannot know God, truthfully, but that the knowledge is not a containment. And containment here has certain modal connotations we'll come to in a moment. Herman Bavinck says this about incomprehensibility. The knowledge that God has revealed of himself in nature and Scripture far surpasses human imagination and understanding. That it's deceptively simple, this statement. I'm going to read it again, and before I do, though, I think sometimes the idea of, if you ask somebody, is God incomprehensible? They might say, well, what do you mean? And if you ask somebody, an average Christian, are there things about God you don't know? Meaning, are there things about God that are knowable that you happen not to know? If you ask that to your congregants, I'd lay odds, not that we're betting or anything, but I'd lay odds every single one of them would say, yeah, I'm sure there's stuff about God I don't know. In other words, this idea that there are truths about God not known or perfectly or clearly known to us is almost a commonplace. That's not... If you find somebody who says, actually, there's nothing about God that's knowable that I don't know perfectly, if you need to take that person aside. That's... Most people have there's something in their brain that says, that's crazy, don't say that. And I'm going to imagine that the people in your church know that they don't know all. But that is not... So what ends up happening is there's a temptation to think divine incomprehensibility means I know God just in so much as he's revealed himself in nature and Scripture, the two great sources of our knowledge of God. And then there's stuff about God I don't know either because he hasn't revealed it or he's revealed it but I haven't gotten to it yet. Okay? That may be true. I'm not disputing that state of affairs, but that's not the doctrine of divine incomprehensibility. The divine incomprehensibility is not just simply a statement that there's stuff about God you don't know and therefore don't comprehend. That's almost a truism. Certainly that's the case. Listen to Bavinck again now. And I'll put the emphasis where it should be. Also called emphasis sometimes. The knowledge that God has revealed of himself in nature and Scripture far surpasses human imagination and understanding. His point is, it's not just what you don't know that you don't comprehend, obviously. It's also what you do know that you don't comprehend. And so clearly the notion of incomprehensibility is not, strictly speaking, coextensive with the notion of knowledge. Can you know God and in the very thing you know, not comprehend and still truthfully know? And I'm proposing that as that's actually all of our knowledge of God. Just a quick little aside, like why emphasize this? I think in some respects, and I'll circle back around to this hopefully in a bit, I think in some respects, people get disillusioned with God because they went into it with false expectations. They expected to comprehend him. And when they found out they couldn't, in sort of a melodramatic snit, they walk away from the faith and start deconstructing it. But what they're deconstructing is actually a false expectation. They expected God to be comprehensible, and when they found out that God was stranger than they were expecting, they quit. I think emphasizing the doctrine of divine incomprehensibility adjusts the expectations for what Christian knowledge of and fellowship with God should even be like. If there's no room for strangeness, by strange I don't mean intellectually absurd, I just mean incomprehensible to me. If there's no room for that in your theology, then people are going to either be disillusioned, that's the one side, or on the other side, they will sort of reimagine God as comprehensible. In other words, they will reinterpret him as comprehensible and thereby turn him into kind of an idol, so to speak. Still borrowing the idioms of Yahweh and Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Still using all the Bible language for God, but nevertheless their conceptuality has finitized him so that he can be comprehended. I think both are disastrous. On the one, you stay in the faith, but the God you worship is comprehensible. On the other, which is a problem, we'll get to it more in a second. On the other side, because you find out you can't comprehend him, you walk away from the faith entirely. And I think we need to train people to expect that all of our knowledge of God will be an uncomprehending true knowledge that can grow deeper and deeper, but never toward comprehension. So Bavinck one more time and I'll move on. The knowledge that God has revealed of himself in nature and Scripture far surpasses human imagination and understanding. It's not just what you don't know, but also what you do know that you don't comprehend. I could say, I know that God is love. And if you said to me, how? I have 3 different sources right off the top of my head. 1 John says so. God, who did not leave himself without witness, Acts 14:17, in that he gave rains and fruitful seasons, that is to say, natural revelation in the bounty provided by God in nature, which witnesses to his benevolence. I'm not saying saving benevolence, but nevertheless, life, breath, and all things is a generous gift. And then also, if I can get a little touchy-feely about it, my own personal experience of salvation, which is witnessed to by the Holy Spirit within me, that I am a child of God. My experience, personally, my observation of God's benevolence generally, and then the proposition, God is love. These are three witnesses that convince me this is true. Do I comprehend God's love? Do I know it with certainty? Yes. Multiple witnesses confirm it to me. Do I comprehend what I certainly know? Not a chance. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the definition of terms in a moment. This actually is, and I'm not going to make a big play to defend mystics here, but if I could put just a word in for mysticism. Robert's like, get him off. I think he's, what's in the coffee? Most mysticisms are horrible. All right, there. I'm on the record. Even things called Christian mysticism can be completely untethered from Holy Scripture. But there is a kind of mysticism, like when Puritans talk about mystical union with Christ. I'll be once upon a time, the sort of like rationalist post-Enlightenment version of myself did not like that language in English Puritans. mystical union, mystical union. And then Joel Beakey talks like that too. Do you ever notice that about Joel Beakey? I like Joel, and I think he's right. But it's not very modern, that way of speaking. But you also get in the early church, Pseudo-Dionysius, an Eastern church father, prays, in a prayer to the Trinity, prays that the Trinity would lead him into the quote-unquote brilliant darkness. Just let the strangeness of that. The brilliant darkness of Scripture's highest peaks. And he's not just being deliberately ironic. Actually, in Scripture, the hiddenness of God is sometimes revealed under the imagery of light, wrapped in a mantle of light, sometimes in the imagery of darkness, Psalm 97, clouds and thick darkness surround him. Job 37, he comes out of the north, comes golden splendor, around God is awesome majesty. And so here's the question, is God brilliant or dark? Yes, Pseudo-Dionysius says brilliant darkness. Why? Because those are the two image motifs that Scripture itself uses to reveal the same thing, his greatness, and also to conceal his greatness. Amos, I think it's 3. These are but the hiding of his ways and revealing. By the way, if you've ever read a Charles Spurgeon sermon, he does this in spades. Revealing, concealing at one and the same moment. So let's move toward it a little bit. Obviously, this grates against the modern kind of post-Enlightenment proclivity to get to the bottom of things. We are looking for the principle, the principial, causal explanation of things, getting rid of mysteries, unlocking the mysteries of the universe so as to make them disappear, thereby gaining control and mastery over the material universe, and knowledge extends. And we get rid of mysteries. And there's a certain extent in which certain mysteries of the universe, which were only mysteries because they were knowable but we didn't know them yet, have now become known to us, and now with the power gained thereby, we can, and I'm not against this. I mean, this is real progress in human knowledge. I flew from the other side of our continent yesterday. I watched a bit of a movie, dozed off, read a book, ordered some coffee, ate that biscotti thing they gave on the plane, all in relative comfort with a bathroom right there if I wanted it, flying hundreds of miles an hour, miles over the surface in relative ease. And when it's the Airbus, it always comes in like half an hour early. It's because somebody understood how matter and motion works under law-like conditions that they were able to actually make it subserve our interests. And here's what we've gotten used to, winning, right? We have think tanks who then investigate matter and motion, understand how it works in law-like conditions, and as a result, you know what we get? The benefits of that knowledge? Air travel, air conditioning, cotton underwear, elastic, also nice. This is, in other words, the modern world as we know it. And here's what we've grown used to. If we set our minds to it, and if we fund it with enough money, we can, as it were, get to the bottom of things and make the mysteries go away. I mean, why are we studying subatomic particle physics? You know what I mean? Okay. Like, no one's ever seen a quark. It's a that's supposedly the smallest particle there is. It's theoretical subatomic particle physics. And we think that it's there, and we think it's there because there are other phenomena that we couldn't really explain without it, and so we're conjecturing its existence because we can't explain what we can see if we don't have something like that to explain it. And we're working hard to actually see it. We don't have a microscope at this point that could show them to us if indeed they're there, but we're working, spending lots of your taxpayer money to get to the bottom of things, to make mysteries go away. And part of the reason that we're spending the taxpayers' money is because we're hoping that when we finally figure out how the quarks do whatever quarks do, if there are even quarks, that in fact we're going to be able to even better master the material universe to our benefit. And we've been winning for 250, 300 years, we've been winning, and so we've gotten used to incomprehensibility is intolerable. Do you get what I'm after? Incomprehensibility that's the stuff we're paying to get rid of. Do you know what I'm after? And then you come to theology, and I'm saying that divine incomprehensibility is not a problem. It's a reality, but it's not a problem. It's not something that we can, as it were, fund a think tank to solve. And certainly, the Second London Confession is not trying to figure God out or make mysteries go away. Thomas Watson says that when we encounter mystery, he said, learn to admire where you cannot fathom. You know what happens when you cannot fathom the mystery of particle physics? Work harder to do so. When you can't fathom God, what to do? Admire, says Watson. A couple texts, and let's just go with infathomability to start with. Psalm 145. Psalm 145. The first 3 verses, and I want to situate this a little bit in the context of worship. I think sometimes when people think of, maybe even your congregants, when they think of going to heaven, and they read texts like this, I'll read the first verse. I will extol you, my God, O King, and I will bless your name forever and ever. And I think to a lot of people that sounds like celestial tedium, like the longest church service. Okay? Like I've been in boring church services. I've been the reason they were boring lots of times. I've bored myself in the pulpit. And I'm the guy who's supposed to land the plane. I understand the whole concept of, and then I look at a text like this, forever and ever and ever, and it can feel like, the whole point of boredom, though, is either physiologically you just can't pay attention anymore, or there's nothing interesting being said. It can be because of that, too. And then you go to David, I will bless your name forever and ever. Verse 2, every day I will bless you, I will praise your name forever and ever. And then there's this question. I want to propose to you, it goes without saying, this is not going to be boredom. We will be elevated to a state where boredom is no longer going to be something that plagues us. This is not going to be tedious. This is not going to be, oh, do we have to sing that song again? It's not going to, some of you know what I'm talking about. It's not going to be that. And then he tells us why, verse 3. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. Now, I'm reading New King James. His greatness is unsearchable. I think NASB says something similar. Does anybody have something beside that? We're going to be a little bit informal. Unsearchable. No one has the NIV in front of them, do they? You've not. Yes, NIV? I have it on the compare. Okay. Oh, I see what you're doing. You don't want to say it's your preferred Bible of choice, but all right. NIV, what does it say? That's actually, this is one of those weird moments where the NIV is more literal than the ESV or the NASB or the New King James, as it turns out. It happens once in a blue moon, but it happens at some very important moments in translation, so just be aware. No man can fathom is actually what it says, or he's unfathomable, we might say. What is a fathom? Not what is it to fathom, that's verbal. What is noun? Fathom. What is a fathom? Right? So it's a unit of water depth. Right? And then verbally, to fathom means to take the measure of the depth. And so when he says no man can fathom, I mean, in the olden days, you would do this, we now do it with sonar, but in the olden days, you just would have a measured line, notched line, and you'd drop that weighted line off, and you'd see it, you'd 15 fathoms, 20 fathoms below the boat. You'd actually, as it were, measure and thereby find out the limits, so to speak, of the unit depths of water. But he says no man can fathom God. And the question is, why not? Is it just a matter of equipment, meaning my sonar is not big enough, my weighted line is not big enough? Well, that's true. That's true. But also, it's because there's no bottom. It's not there. You know what I'm after? It's not just that you can't reach it, but it's way, way, way down there. It's actually, there is no bottom. Put a little differently, there is no last great thing about God. You know what I mean? Like no one's like, hey, did you finish with the greatness of God? Yeah, I got to the end. What? That's not a reality. There's no such thing. The end of God's greatness, where you get to the bottom of it all. There is no bottom. It's boundless. It's limitless. A limited creature will never, as it were, find out. Well, you can see where I go with this, the limits of the Almighty. In that connection, Isaiah 40, I want to just look at this briefly together. God puts measurements on the world by creating it, but then the question that the prophet's dealing with is, does the world then return the favor? God measures the world, do we measure God? Verse 12, Isaiah 40. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, measured the heavens with a span, and calculated the dust of the earth in a measure, weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? It's rhetorical. Of course, it's God. God is the one who gave, who measured out. He knows the measure of the world because he gives measure to the world. Verse 13, who has directed the Spirit of the Lord. In the Hebrew, it's the exact same word for measured. So we probably should just say, who has measured the Spirit of the Lord? So he measures us. Do we measure him? You know what I'm after? God comprehends you, as it were, knows your measure. Do you comprehend God? Do you measure him in return? Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has taught him? With whom did he take counsel? And who instructed him and taught him in the path of justice? Who taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? The idea is, well, in our main session tomorrow for the conference, we hope to talk about divine omniscience, that the world is not actually the source of God's knowledge of the world. But we'll get there. So the world doesn't measure God. The world doesn't put a limit on God. The world doesn't find out the limits of God. Verse 15, the nations are as a drop in a bucket. They're counted as small dust on the scales. Look, he lifts up the isles like a very little thing. And Lebanon, now I'm going to come to this. This is an important verse, actually. Lebanon is not sufficient or not enough to burn, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. By the way, it's a very important verse about worship and incomprehensibility. I'm going to come back to it in a second. Verse 17. All nations before him are as nothing, and they're counted by him as less than nothing and worthless. In other words, an absolute incommensurability between God and the world. The distance between nothing and something is not measurable. It's an infinite, it's not a commensurable distance. It's not a long way. It's infinite in transcendence. Now, verse 16. Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. And his point is this. God measures the world. The world doesn't measure God. The reason the world doesn't measure God is because God is, by anything finite, immeasurable, beyond all measure, beyond all computation, beyond all commensurability. So if you're going to worship God, he says Lebanon is not enough to burn. The idea, Lebanon is where the great cedar forests are. Lebanon is where you go if you need lots of wood. And the idea is something like this. Cut down all the trees, kindle countless altars, slay every beast, offer up the whole world, so to speak, as an incense offering of praise to him. And God would never say to that, all right, everyone, it's enough. You know that verse in the Bible where God says, hey, everyone, that's enough worship. Yeah. Because it's not there. That's why you don't know it. Because there's no such verse. God never says, hey, everybody, you can overdo it. You could praise a man too much. Grandmothers are notorious for this, boasting on their grandchildren. My little, he's such a, and you put up with it because it's grandma, but you can overdo it. If someone praises you and you just actually know that you're not as great as they think you are and as they're saying they are, and you might even say, hey, you're overdoing it. You're a little pink-faced, and that never happens in the Bible with God. God's never like, all right, aren't you exaggerating my greatness a little bit? It never happens. Nor does he say, hey, stop with the worship. It's actually a little too much. That's an impossible scenario. Because the world is not commensurate to God, because the world cannot measure God, our praises, our worship, when we come to the end of our church services, it's not because we've done enough, it's because we're hungry and tired. In other words, we don't really end with the worship of God. We just take breaks due to our limitations. That's all. That's because of his incomprehensibility. All right, now a little bit on language. This language, I think we struggle with this a little bit because we tend to, in our modern English, use comprehension and knowledge as if they were strictly interchangeable notions. But that's That's just custom. It's a mistake. It's not really true. The word for comprehension I'm looking for something that I could actually comprehend. I usually have a small object up here. Can I borrow the cap on, actually the whole thing? Is that all right? The root, prehendere, I know, prehend, but prehendere means to grasp or lay hold of. And then if you put a prefix on it, a preposition ap on front of prehendere, you get apprehendere. We have this word in our language, apprehend. And the ap means at or onto. Okay, at or onto. So if you take this water bottle, if I grasp at it or onto it, I really do possess it in my grasp. I really have it, so to speak. But I have it in an apprehending manner, not a comprehending manner. Let's just take the cap, if you will. Apprehending the cap is this way. I've grasped onto it or at it. But I could transform the manner of holding by doing this. And take off the ap, put on a little comprehendere, and that means to grasp so as to entirely circumscribe or encompass in your grasp. So when I apprehend, I have it, but in a certain sense, I don't have it in a way where my grasp, as it were, has encircled the limits of the thing. And then I can grasp it this way, and that's all right. But there are objects that I could apprehend and yet not comprehend because I'm not able to. So I'm going to take the same water bottle as it is. I am currently apprehending the water bottle. With my right hand, am I able to comprehend this water bottle? No. Why can I not? I'm not talking about your mind right now. I'm going to literally comprehend it with my hand. And why? Because the surface magnitude of this bottle exceeds the surface magnitude of my hand, in which case then my hand could never, as it were, measure in its grasp the thing that I'm holding literally and truthfully right now. If we transfer this whole notion of prehension, which literally means grasping, metaphorically over to knowledge, which is what we do, we say, do you grasp what I'm saying, which is just a metaphor because you only grasp with your hand, but analogous to hands laying hold of objects, minds lay hold of truths, we transfer the language from hands to minds, and we understand how metaphors work. I can apprehend a truth, and I can even apprehend it in greater and lesser degrees, but if that truth is literally boundless, and if my knowing equipment is bounded or finite, I can know, for instance, the infinite. But what I can't do is measure infinity with my mind. Does that make sense? Or put it a little differently, I can know the infinite truthfully. I cannot know the infinite infinitely. Are you getting that modal non-symmetry? It's not that I don't know the infinite. It's that I don't know the infinite in such a way that my mind corresponds in a one-to-one commensurate way with the infinite. This is what we mean by incomprehensibility. It's not, this is, I think, the fear we have to sort of lay to rest. It's not non-knowledge. The difference between apprehending and comprehending is modal. Both are forms of knowing or possessing, but they're not the same mode of it. Good? Because I teach this to undergrads, and as soon as I say you cannot comprehend God, the first thing that they think is, you're saying we can't know God, and we have the Bible and we have nature, and so that can't be true. But comprehension and knowledge are not actually coextensive. Comprehension is actually one manner of knowing, but it's not the only manner of knowing, and it's not the only way of knowing truthfully. That's the way God knows himself truthfully. That's not the way we know God truthfully. Our manner is apprehending. Bavinck puts it very summarily. He can be apprehended, he cannot be comprehended. Okay? That's the distinction that we should make. Basil of Caesarea, or I'm sorry, not Basil, Basil the Great, he is Basil of Caesarea, says the knowledge of God consists in the perception of his incomprehensibility. I'm going to read that again. The knowledge of God consists in the perception of his incomprehensibility. He's not saying that's all there is to the knowledge of God, but any true knowledge of God will be qualified with the reality that whatever's going on in our knowledge, it's not comprehension of what we know. It doesn't mean we don't really know it. We just don't know it in the mode of comprehending. that's all by way of, that's all big intro. Now a couple fine points that we need to drill into. Next, the finite cannot contain the infinite. I'm not even going to offer arguments for that. Just think about it and you'll be there. The finite cannot contain the infinite. You just know that's true. Stephen Charnock says, false and idolatrous thoughts of God are not due to his incomprehensibility, but flow from the truth-suppressing wills of fallen humans. God is infinitely superior to the choicest conceptions, not only of a sinner, but of a creature. One thing we need to get out of our minds is that incomprehensibility is a result of the fall. There's an opaqueness and a fog in our minds, a truth-suppressing unrighteousness in our wills that actually causes confusion in our minds, in which the knowledge of God is made problematic by the fall. Noetic depravity is sometimes called. I affirm that. But that is not incomprehensibility. Incomprehensibility, it's not like Adam and Eve comprehended God right up until Genesis 3:6, and then they lost their comprehension. Not even Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael, if you can just indulge me a little bit, comprehend God. And they're holy, like have never sinned and never will, and also don't comprehend God. Divine incomprehensibility follows from the fact of the reality of God's unboundedness in being and glory, and the finitude of all creatures. This again from Charnock. If all the conceptions of God below the true nature of God were sin, that is to say, if every thought of God that didn't perfectly measure him were sin, there is not a holy angel in heaven free from sin, because though they are the most capacious creatures, yet they cannot have such a notion of an infinite being as is fully suitable to his nature unless they were infinite as he himself is. If angels are finite, that finitude qualifies the manner of their knowing. They can know the infinite, and so can you, just not infinitely. Does that make sense? In his point, if incomprehensibility were due to sin, and if having thoughts of God that we're not comprehending were actually sinful thoughts or idolatrous thoughts, then even the holy angels would suddenly become guilty of sin somehow. His point is that's absurd. Finitum non capax infinitum. The finite cannot contain the infinite. Now, a key text. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27. If I have a go-to, this for me is my go-to for this doctrine. There are lots of texts you could, but I love this one in particular. Solomon is dedicating the temple in Jerusalem, probably the most remarkable human structure they'd ever seen. The pyramids at Giza, which were old by this time, were feats of great engineering, and they were much bigger. Probably most of these people had never been down there to see them. The house in Jerusalem that Solomon had built is certainly the most magnificent and beautiful structure they've ever seen. And Solomon comes to lead them in a prayer of dedication in 1 Kings 8. Just before the prayer begins, in verse 12, Solomon spoke, the Lord said he would dwell in the dark cloud. I have surely, by the way, that's the Shekinah glory cloud, which is a strange cloud, by the way. It's a cloud that shines. I'm just trying to defend Pseudo-Dionysius here. When he says brilliant darkness, and then the Shekinah glory cloud is a cloud that is shiny, you get where the sort of light and darkness motifs converge in imagery. He said he would dwell in a dark cloud. I have surely built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell forever. So this is the idea. Exalted God deserves an exalted house. Great God, great house. You get the idea? Same. Great God, great worship, great devotion. Like, do you not try to offer greatness to the great God because he's great? Right? So great house, great God. Then verse 22 begins the prayer. I won't read it, but in verse 27, there's almost this parenthetical interlude inside of the prayer in which Solomon has sort of that moment, which is this moment. A beautiful box on top of a hill for God seems like something that shouldn't be possible. You know what I mean? Putting God in a box on a hill made by human hands. And didn't he just say, I've made a lofty God, lofty house. I made you a lofty house, your dwelling place forever. And in verse 27, which is very early in the prayer, there's a moment, which is itself part of the prayer, but it's somewhat parenthetical, but it is part of the prayer, in which Solomon addresses this whole thing of putting four walls and a lid on top of God seems like it shouldn't be possible. You know, Jeremiah 23:23, do not I fill heaven and earth, declares the Lord. Now listen to it. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the heaven of heavens, here it comes. This is incomprehensibility. Cannot contain you. How much less this house or this temple which I have built? So Solomon has this moment publicly in which he says, what we have just done, which looks superficially like a container, is actually not a container. Do not be deceived. These four walls and this lid, whatever their function is, are not a God box or a container. Modern people, you can't put God in a box. I couldn't agree more. But if you think you comprehend him, that's exactly what you're doing. You know what I'm after? If you insist that God is not mysterious, and he must be knowable in the way that other things are knowable, and his ways must be able to be traced out, as soon as you insist that you have some kind of comprehending knowledge of God, that's precisely what you're doing, as it were, containing him inside of a finite structure. Now, what I think is interesting, like modern people, like as soon as you get to divine incomprehensibility, I can think of theologians that hate the notion of the ineffability of God because they think, well, if God's ineffable, then we can't be sure about anything that we're saying about him is true, and then what's the point of theology, and what's the point of worship, and what's the point, and they get all melodramatic, and they start deconstructing the entire Christian faith if we can't comprehend God. That would be the equivalent of Solomon saying in verse 28, hey everyone, it occurs to me that we can't put God in a box. Thanks to everyone who helped build the box. It's really nice. I think we're going to repurpose it as a community center because it occurs to me that you can't actually put God in a box. like what's the point? In other words, you can imagine the melodrama. If he's ineffable and mysterious and I can't comprehend him, then why do we even write books about him? Why do we sing praises to him? Why do we build houses of worship for him? I mean, what's the point of it all? That's obviously not what Solomon does. He just carries on with the prayer. Because that's not what it's about. The house on the hill is actually God condescending to put a created revelation of himself, the glory cloud, inside of a box, but what he doesn't put inside of the box is himself so as to be circumscribed by it. In fact, it's not just the house that won't contain him. You know what else doesn't contain him? The heaven of heavens. Not where six-winged seraphs cry, holy, holy, holy. Even there, God is not, as it were, contained. The limits of the Almighty aren't. There you go. There aren't any. And if you have a limited realm, whether it's a house on a hill or heaven itself, no finite structure, no created structure can actually, as it were, size him up or box him in or commensurately answer to him in a one-to-one way. Now, let me expound on this. I know I'm watching the time, but I have a couple more things I need to say. I think there's also, though, if we can extrapolate from this principle, and I want to take 1 Kings 8:27 sort of as a charter text. I think we can extrapolate from the idea that God cannot be physically contained in a box to say it's not just that he can't be contained spatially inside of a box. I mean, part of that is because he's not a spatial entity. He's not a body with mass occupying dimensionalities in space. That's not how God exists. It's not just that. It's that if the finite cannot contain the infinite, or if structures of finitude could never measure the absolutely infinite one, then it's not just houses on hills or heavens of heavens that can't do it. It's not just spatially, it's also metaphysically. That is to say, categorical metaphysical being, Aristotle's 10 categories of being, could never actually measure or classify God. God is not actually in a categorical scheme of being in which he is set apart from other things by this delimiting that. You know what I mean? Rationality delimiting your animality, thereby setting you apart from all the other animal-type things. God isn't even a species, which actually would then restrict his being to distinguish it from other things with which he shares a genus. It's just not like, in other words, we don't box him up by putting him into metaphysical categorical schemes. We don't box, which, by the way, is exactly what the medieval scholastics were insisting that we can't do. They would take Aristotle's 10 categories substance plus 9 categories of accidents, and explain how, properly speaking, God couldn't actually fit inside of this categorical scheme. And everyone's like, you're interpreting the Bible through Aristotelianism. No, we're taking Aristotelianism, which is a pretty good natural philosophy, and saying God doesn't fit anywhere inside of this. That's what was actually going on. Incomprehensibility. We're using Aristotle's categories not to put God in them, but to meticulously explain how he could never fit in them. That's what divine incomprehensibility does. And I'll throw in another one, and this one's going to trouble us, especially evangelicals. I mean that in whatever good sense we can still say evangelical. I would say it that way. Even this. Language is a created phenomena of squiggles and sounds by which we refer to concepts which themselves correspond to things or realities. It's a convention. It's a human convention. Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, English are human conventions under the divine providence of God, which are systems of communication by which we refer to concepts and thereby can communicate about concepts to others with the transportation vehicle we call words. It's amazing, actually. It's really amazing. But human language itself is a finite structure. That is to say, it is delimited by the very natures of the people whose minds create languages. And then the rules governing them, imperatives, interrogatives, exclamatories. And what God does in Scripture is he condescends to, as it were, reveal himself in a finite structure of human language. That does not mean that this does not refer to him truthfully and inerrantly. It means that he's not contained in the Bible. That one I know is going to disturb you, but the Bible does not contain him. Is the Bible uncreated or created? Created. Is the Bible finite or infinite? The Bible, not God, the Bible. Finite. If the finite cannot contain the infinite, even in theory, then we should say that the Bible refers inerrantly, authoritatively, truthfully to God, and if you don't receive its message of salvation, you will perish. There's no reason to step back from that conviction whatsoever. But what we want to be careful to do, though, is not say that this is God's measurements. These are God's measurements. God is actually unmeasured, even by his own revelation. So let me come to this. God's greatness is actually not just greater than your greatest thought of God. God's greatness is even greater than God's own revelation of himself. It's not because God is not revealing himself truthfully. It's because that revelation itself is a finite packaging of a truth that could never really be contained by a finite structure. Is that? All right, now what's the practical value of this? I think a couple things. In one respect, I teach mostly undergraduate students, seminary students several times a year, but my workaday world is 19 to 22-year-olds. And a lot of them have been raised in a kind of sentimentalist, emotional sort of Christianity in which God was really just like a big version of a good man without a body. That's, if I can put it that way, and who's very benign and loving, but he's basically, except for the lacking body part, he's pretty much like the best man you know. And he's not that strange, and their expectations are low in terms of what they think it takes to know God, or what the knowledge of God even means. And then when they find out that God is mysterious, that his ways are not our ways, his thoughts are not our thoughts, that his paths are past tracing out. Once they find that out, they become emotionally very disturbed and disillusioned. And I'm going to suggest it's not just American undergraduate students that are this way. I would imagine many people in the pews in your church are this way. They have an expectation that they'll be able to manage their relationship with God because they've got at least enough figured out about God. And this notion of a beyondness, this notion that I don't comprehend him, the notion that his greatness is actually greater than even the Bible's own proclamation of his greatness, which doesn't falsify the Bible, it just reminds us that it's creature. That this this sort of transcendence and greatness is something that really needs to capture their hearts if they're going to submit themselves to and entrust themselves utterly to to God. It needs to be the incomprehensible one, so they don't begin to, in disillusionment, deconstruct their faith. Like I said earlier, I think what they will tend to do is one of two things. Either say, I don't think Christianity is real, and I'm not even sure there is a God, but the God they were looking for was the God they didn't find was a God they should never have been looking for in the first place. You know what I'm after? Because he was just going to be a big man without a body. Or on the other side, this happens all too often, is, as I mentioned at the beginning, they begin to speak about God as though he is comprehensible. I would propose, though I won't get into this right now, even things like thinking that God is composed of parts. I cannot comprehend something that's absolutely simple. I can comprehend something that's composed of parts, because if it's composed of parts, there are bits delimiting bits, metaphysically or physically, that then put that thing into an approachable realm of metaphysical intelligibility that make God comprehensible to me. And I think part of the reason that people hold on to a complex, compound God, though it's often inarticulate, is because they fear in an unhealthy way coming face to face with the immeasurable, with the incomprehensible, with the one that cannot be reduced into their conceptual schematics. Do you know what I'm at? I think some of that fear, it's inarticulate. I'm not saying that everyone knows that that's what's motivating them, but I think that's part of it. There's a lot of like hip and trendy theology out there that will ridicule you mercilessly if you embrace something like divine incomprehensibility or ineffability, and say that you've basically fallen on your intellectual sword, and that's an intellectually repugnant position to hold. And there's a fear of man, there's a fear of not knowing, there's a fear of the unknown, there's a fear of not really being able to, I think on a more practical level, manage God. Knowledge is power, and then when I tell you you have less of it, or the mode of your knowing is not the mode you thought it was, it takes it out of your hands, so to speak. And it doesn't leave you with a capricious God. It leaves you with a God that's trustworthy, who makes promises and keeps those promises because he's true to himself and will not deny himself. But it leaves you with a God whose ways are more mysterious than you might have been thinking. And I think it's a good thing if we can actually say that's a reasonable and even biblical expectation. I'm going to leave our first session here. I know we go to a break, and on the break I'll contemplate what I want to do. I had a second whole topic to cover. We could return to this, though, if you want. There's a bit more. I think we need to talk. I'll think about this. God dwells in unapproachable light. No man has seen him or can see him. Elihu, we'll come to Elihu in Job, says, the Almighty, we cannot find him. But then Isaiah says, seek the Lord while he may be found. And it seems like maybe we should say a few things about, if God can't be found, then why are there texts that exhort us to seek him and find him? So I'll decide after our break. But can I close this session in prayer, and then God, you are good and you do good, and we bless you. We bless you for this true revelation of yourself. And Lord, we bless you for your incomprehensibility. We bless you that you are not measurable by finite measures. Lord, for then you would not be God. You would not be greater than your own creation, but you would be equal to or lesser than your creation. Lord, we do bless you, and we confess that you do excel even our most excellent ability to express your excellence. Lord, for this we do bless you again and again, forever and ever, Lord, for you are boundless in your blessedness. Teach us these things and help us to teach them to others, we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Let's take 10 minutes, man.